Okay, I will call the meeting to order. I'll begin by acknowledging we are in Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of Métis Nation. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel, and with me is Ray Massacott to my left and Doug Marks to my far left. The assessor today is Stephen Lobenstein. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And the recording secretary is Michelle Neepeth. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements of the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council, is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the applications of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will include with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions the applicant may have, and the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliver in private and make its decisions. We'll receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are recorded and will be part of the public record. So can you do this one right now, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you state your full name, please?
Stephen Lobenstein.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Do you affirm that you Can you state your full name, please?
Roslaw.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay, so the first item on today's agenda, no address, but the file number is 192799. So you can.
Sure.
And there's class and liability on this one.
What's that?
Class and liability.
Oh, class and liability on this one as well?
Michelle will be withdrawn.
Withdrawn? Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so
The roll number is 030930027885. The owner is Hopewell Development. The assessed value is $6,056,000. It's a vacant industrial land. M2 is the zoning, and the land area is 915,943 square feet. So if we just turn to page 2, we can get a look at the property. This is obviously vacant industrial land. This is in the Hopewell development area. So it basically straddles Waverly, Pembina, and Bishop Grandin. It's a new development area. So this development area is going to be a mixed-use development. There's multifamily in there. There's going to be commercial, gas station, industrial, and there's even a rapid transit part of it at the far end by Pembina. So this development, we're just going to be focusing on the 2 industrial properties here today. So this land itself is somewhat interesting. This land was once had the sugar beet plant on it, so this land was considered contaminated at one time. It has since been remediated. So what they did to remediate was basically they just scraped off the top part of the land, any of the contamination that was there. This was done by the original owner, the person who owns Harris Transport. So if you look up the top of my picture on page 2, you can see there's like a yard there up in the top right-hand corner. This person used to own all of this land as well, and they were the ones that also remediated it at the end, just by scraping the top portion of it. So if you turn to page 3, you can get another look at the property, and this is in 2018. This is after it's all been scraped. And then on page 4, you can see 2016 where the land had not been remediated. So we know the land's now been remediated. That being said, so this property is the industrial park. So for this industrial property, it's going to have access. There's going to be about 3 different roads it's going to have. It's going to have a road that you can see running along it. And this road runs all the way to Chevrolet Boulevard, which allows you to connect to Waverly or Pembina. And this road also connects to Bishop Grandin. And there's also going to be a 3rd road put in that I think it's currently being constructed that will allow them to connect to Scurfield and Waverly as well. So fortunately I don't have an image of that, but there is 3 different access points for this industrial property. That being said, I'm just going to turn to page 5. You can see just the zoning map. It's manufacturing general. This district is intended to provide light manufacturing processes, service, storage, wholesale, distribution operations. So at the moment, there's obviously no buildings on it or anything, so none of this manufacturing is currently happening. Turning to page 6, this is just the cost value summarization. There's obviously no buildings on it, so the cost is only the land cost, which is $6,056,000. So for land valuation, we go by the comparable approach. We look for comparable, basically sales of similar vacant land. So if we turn to page 7, we can see the comparable chart I have. So when you're looking at comparables for land, you basically want to be looking at square footage is important, land shape is somewhat important, location is quite important, and zoning to an extent is important as well. So when we look at the comparables, my comparables 2 and 3 are on Waverly Street, which is in close proximity to the property. Comparable 4 is in Hutchins. It's on Hutchins, which is further away. That's in the Inkster Industrial Park. And then comparable 5 is on Wilkes, which is in somewhat close proximity as well to the property. So comparable 2, if you look down to the sales detail, it sold in March of 2016 for $2.45 million at $11.79 a square foot. Comparable 3 sold in February of 14 for $2.975 million for $10.65 a square foot. Comparable 4 in Hutchins sold in January of 2015 for $2.199 million for $6.89. And this one's interesting too because this one is on the impacted site list for contaminated land. It's got contaminated soil as we put for the land influences. And then comparable 5 on Wilkes sold in January of 14 for $11.42 a square foot for $1.8 million. So if you look over to the subject property on the left-hand side, you can see we have a rental rate of, or a rent per square foot of $6.61, which applied to the area of $915,943 works out to our $6,056,000. So just to get a better idea of the comparable properties, you can turn to page 8. You can see the comparable properties. So the first 2, these are the 2 that are on Waverly, and they're actually side by side to one another on Waverly. They're close to Clarence Avenue, and they're not far off from the subject property. You can see at the time they were sold. They were vacant land. Turning to page 9, you can see the Hutchins property. That's the one that's comparable 3 in the top. This is the one that has contaminated soil. Again, this one's furthest away from the subject property in the Inkster Industrial Park. And then comparable 4, this is right on Wilkes. It's right beside the golf dome on Wilkes. Also, if you look at it, this is there's a lot of shrubs and trees in this, so this has not even been cleared for development yet, and it's still sold for the price of $11.42 a square foot. So page 10 is just the class and liability, which is not in debate today. And page 11 is the Municipal Assessment Act. So we feel the value of $6,056,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed.
Okay, questions?
Just a few minutes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lodenstein, so you agree with the principle that land value is based on the utility that it can derive? Is that correct?
In the terms of what the zoning is, like it derives an industrial zoning, so
what
the development could be for
development potential.
Okay,
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, okay. And things that influence that, you mentioned a number of items which I completely agree with that influence land value, but you'd agree that accessibility and visibility are also factors. They're part of the location that you described. They would also influence value. Would you agree?
I think for industrial properties, accessibility is important, and as I mentioned, they have 3 routes in and out to access this property. Visibility is probably more important for your commercial and your retail properties, I would say, than more your industrial properties.
That's all the questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, Ray?
No questions.
Any questions?
No, no.
Okay, so you, looking at your comparables, I mean, you're doing 661, is that just because of economies of scale, larger parcels?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, the value came at 661 is because of economies of scale.
Yeah, economies of scale, yeah. It's a larger property.
So I think if there were no properties that sold that were of that size.
Not in the area that we're looking at, no. It's 915,000 square feet in this area. I could not find any there. There are some larger sales in the city, but not of this type of property for this type of development.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some rebuttal evidence.
Okay.
And maybe what I'll do is go through the direct submission first, and then the rebuttal has to do with, obviously, some of these comparable sales, so I'll kind of talk about all of those at once. So if I can ask you to turn to the main submission, the one that's not marked rebuttal. And Mr. Lovenstein had described the property very well. There's not much for me really to go over. But what we'll be discussing, or what I'll be describing in our analysis, I guess the difference of opinion that we have, is that the subject site, not just the size, but mainly the location, the accessibility as mentioned, the visibility, will affect the value. The horizon of time and the development horizon also would influence value. And what I want to draw attention to is that when we look at comparisons, that we have to understand what's happened in those sales transactions. For example, a property that was sold for development for commercial use usually will demand accessibility, visibility, things that the subject property may not have, and will command a higher square foot value. So I think we need to look a little bit closer at the comparisons, both that we're going to submit and that Mr. Lovenstein has submitted. And I'll talk about those mainly in the rebuttal. So just quickly to go through then, we have a photograph of the property on page 2. This is taken as of October 2018. And you can see better on page 3 how the property is situated. It's a large property, nearly 1 million square feet of land. It has been almost completely remediated from the lime contamination that had been on the site. What they're doing now is finishing off remediation and then grading. And as they're doing that, they have already established one entranceway that I was on from Chevrier that comes down. Now, just to point out, you come in down Chevrier, which is a smaller thoroughfare. It's not a major thoroughfare. And then you would turn off Chevrier down this side road, which is a 2-lane road. And that winds down past the industrial properties that front Chevrier to eventually reach where the subject site is. You can see better on at the bottom of page 3 that it is kind of in the middle of this whole site. So it is accessible, but not to the same sort of degree as a property in an industrial park or on a major thoroughfare like Waverley. And obviously tied to that is visibility. I mean, this is really kind of in the back of all this property off Chevrier. The other 2 access points, one that currently exists off Bishop Grandin, is more specifically for the commercial and residential development that's happening at the site on the south end. It has roundabouts that slow traffic. It would be very difficult for industrial purposes to be using that as a main entrance. In fact, I think it would probably be frowned upon by the developers. And then for that reason, the third that they're working on now is coming off of Waverley and extends through past the hydro site. So in the end, what you have are these large industrial sites that, of course, the developer is hoping to sell or develop further, but they're kind of in the middle. They're the leftover. They're the remnants of the development that they plan to do at this Bishop Grandin site that is predominantly focused on multi-residential development and commercial development. So if I can ask you to turn to page 4, you can see the master plan that they have for the site as a whole. This is the entire 103 acres, of which the subject is 21 in the center. And the subject is in the section that is kind of a pinkish color. And there's 2 that you'll see. We'll be discussing both this morning, but they're kind of in the center of the site. They're really the rearage to what the developer is focusing on, which is in the beige and more red areas. And those are respectively a multi-residential development and a commercial development. Now, they've had this site since 1997, and granted, they've been remediating it for some time. It's been a long road. But they've also been marketing this site, and it's been very slow. And to date, the physical condition of the site as a whole consists of 2 apartment blocks, kind of situated in the middle of, I don't know if you've driven by Mr. Brandon and see them, but they're just kind of sitting in the middle of this beige section. And as we speak, they're just finishing, and you can see it in the photograph on page 2 in the background, they're finishing a good life on the commercial portion. That's it. As you can see, nothing's changed from that picture from when I was there 2 weeks ago. It's just barren. Now, not to say that it obviously doesn't have value or potential down the road, but this is one of the main factors that our client and we are concerned about, is that the timeline of the development horizon is still some ways off. And if I'm buying that property today, I know that I have to carry the costs on my mortgage and development costs, for example, until I can even start seeing a return. And that would influence negatively the potential value. It's very different than what we're going to see as many of the comparisons, which are basically sites, on major thoroughfares or on major roads, ready, with the exception of some physical changes, ready to develop. So maybe I'll ask you to go ahead to page 7. We have a listing of about 12 different industrial properties, ranging in size from just under 120,000 square feet up to 690,000 square feet, so nothing quite reaching the size of the subject, throughout the city. Now, before I go into each of these, I'll ask you to turn to the very last page. This is a marketing snapshot done by Capital Group as of Q1 2018, our reference date. And it's talking more about industrial product that's developed. But you'll see at the bottom, highlighted in yellow, they state what the average per acre sale price of industrial land is in Winnipeg. $217,000 per acre, which is just under $5 a square foot. That's what industrial land, on average, throughout the city sells for. Now, the hypothesis is that being in Fort Garry, there's a premium to the land value. But based on what I've described about the physical characteristics of the site and the development horizon, I would suggest that a delta that we're seeing, of 20 to 30% higher than the average industrial value is excessive. And one may say, but the sales in Fort Garry are rather high. Well, let's look at some of those. Actually, sorry, I'll pause. We'll look at some of those when we go through the rebuttal. I'm going to describe industrial sales throughout the city first, some of which are in Fort Garry. So on page 8, we have the overhead aerial photograph of the first comparison. Easily to develop. In fact, from the time it was purchased in September 17, it was very quickly developed as an industrial property, as you can see in this photograph. And it was purchased for development for $4.18 a square foot. It's located in St. Boniface Industrial Park, very easily accessible off Camille 6, and much, much smaller than the subject property. The second, on page 9, is a property just south of Nairn Avenue. Similar situation, purchased for development in late 2017. Again, much smaller than the subject, zoned M2, and was purchased for $6 a square foot. And this is easily accessible, just turning off Nairn and then Foster, and you're right there. Third comparison, on page 10. Again, is a serviced, very accessible site off Mission in the old St. Boniface Industrial. And it was purchased for development and has been developed since in 2016 for $4.03 a square foot. Page 11, we have a site in the Inksbrook, St. James, North St. James area. And this was purchased in mid-2015 for $3.16 a square foot, being used for trailer storage now. Again, easily accessible off Innsbrook Boulevard. Page 12, site again off Camille Sis in the St. Boniface Industrial Park. Much smaller than the subject property and purchased for development, and since developed, purchased for $4.02 a square foot. Page 13. This is an example of a property in the Fort Garry Industrial Park that would lead one to believe that we have to apply a significant premium to properties in Fort Garry. But this is, the caution is that most of these properties that sold in Fort Garry are on high traffic corridors and purchased for development that is often not industrial. So for example, retail development around Seasons, retail development around Kenniston Common. In this case, this was purchased to be the Jaguar Lexus auto dealership. And it makes sense. This comes back to my original point about accessibility and visibility. This site commands a much higher value because you could turn it into a high-end car dealership because of the accessibility and visibility. Is that comparable to the subject property, which is essentially stuck in the middle of this pending development of Bishop Brandon? And I would suggest not at all. Page 14, we go back to a typical industrial property in Winnipeg. This is located just off of Brookside Boulevard, or King Edward, I guess it still is at that point, and it's used for trailer storage. It was leased for trailer storage. It was purchased in 2016 for a price of $6.57 a square foot. On the next page, 15, again in the St. Boniface Industrial Park, late 2017 sale price of $4.92 a square foot. All of these, again, are smaller and more easily accessible than the subject property. Page 16, again, a property in Fort Garry that sold for a very high price of $15.87 a foot. Well, that must justify a higher price on the, or a higher value on the subject property. But this is part of the Waverly Auto Mall, and it's kind of now at the end of the site, and it's accessed off Fultz, and it's actually been constructed as the new Subaru dealership. Again, the subject property would never be used or be purchased for development of these types, and therefore it wouldn't command these kind of values. And I think the last comparison is once again in St. Boniface Industrial Park, very easily accessible, purchased in 2016 for $3.80 a square foot, and it's been since developed as the new Parmalat processing facility. So we've established that average industrial sale prices in the city are just under $5. We've looked at industrial sales throughout the city, including Fort Garry, and we see that unless there's a reason why the comparison is far superior, the prices typically hover around that $5 a square foot. The average, so when we look at these, it would be inappropriate to be thinking that we should be including properties like 1420 Waverly or the Fultz property, both developed as car dealerships or purchased for development as car dealerships. And they skew the averages. So a more prudent thing to do would be, let's take a look at the range again, and maybe take those out and see where we end up. And we end up back to what I was mentioning as a typical industrial value of just under $5, $4.58 a square foot. Now, one may say, but would you not argue that, or would you not say that overall, notwithstanding the commercial developments, those prized sites in Fort Garry, but that Fort Garry commands a higher value? And I would say, perhaps, but let's not get carried away by only looking at sites purchased that are far superior. So if I can direct your attention back to the last marketing brochure, I think this is an interesting exercise. Rather than say we got two superior properties in Fort Garry, we should use those as our comparisons, we establish what industrial property typically sells for, and then we look to see what typical rents would be as developed for industrial properties. This is on the last page. And what it's basically telling us is that different quadrants command different rental rates for developed industrial property. And if you look to the southwest quadrant, you'll see it is, in fact, higher than the properties in other areas. But let's not, again, let statistics drive us too far away from fact. The fact that they're higher is because it's a newer area. Most of the product in southwest Winnipeg is new, as opposed to Inkster Park, St. James, or the older part of St. Boniface. So to say that that should be the premium of that rental rate over others, I think would be skewed when we're looking at land. That being said, we will agree that there should be some premium applied to land in Fort Garry, industrial land. And we will use that premium of 35%. Again, knowing it's skewed, because that's talking about industrial product that's newer. That's why it's higher, it's not because of the location. But we'll still apply that. Even if we apply that, we have an average land value of $6.21 a square foot. So this is taking the average without the dealership purchases, and then applying a 35% premium. The last adjustment, though, that I'd like to keep in mind is, we talked about this at the beginning, economies of scale. This is a massive site, 915,000 feet. It's 50% larger than our largest comparison. So adjusting for that, I don't think that the value of this land should be over $6 a square foot. When we look at what's happening with industrial land in the city, we look at the timeline for development, we look at the accessibility, the visibility, the condition of the site, and we look closer at the comparisons which are being shown today. So on page 18, we summarize that the 21 acres at the rate of $6 a square foot, which is just over $260,000 an acre, would indicate a value of $5.489 million. And we ask the board to consider that evidence, and that completes our presentation.
You're going to lead us through the rebuttal?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the rebuttal, the city had four comparisons. So now we're turning to this new document here. The first one I've already talked about. This is a property at the corner of Clarence and Waverley. Very high traffic, high visibility, good accessibility, corner site, purchased as the development for Jaguar Lexus auto dealership. Not comparable. It's just not comparable to the subject. Right beside that is the second comparison, 1450 Waverley. Again, it enjoys the same accessibility and visibility, and it was purchased for development as the MTS data center. Traffic count far higher, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't think this is a comparable property to a typical industrial property in the middle of Bishop Brandon site. If I can ask you to go past, I've got page 5 and 4 reversed there. So if we can skip to this page here, page 4, is the property in Inkster Park on Hutchings. Very good industrial property in Inkster Park, corner site, large frontage along Dunlop and Hutchings. And it sold for $6, I think, and 57 cents, but I don't think the subject would be comparable to this, again, because of accessibility and visibility. And of note, what we had on the page previous, is that even the assessment, the city's own assessment value as of April 18 is not as high as the sale price of this property. It's at $463 a square foot. And the last comparison is again in Fort Garry. It's on Wilkes, just off of Kenniston. Again, a lot smaller than the subject, 3.62 acres versus 21. And our client bought this property. Long Holdings, who own Long McQuaid Music, bought this property, and they were going to develop it back at that time as a multi-tenant commercial development. And that was before the setbacks were in place for railways. Between that and what they discovered was a lack of demand for the site has sat undeveloped, and they realized they overpaid. They appealed based on the fact they overpaid. The board agreed that they overpaid. Despite the sale price on this property being $1.8 million, the assessment has been reduced each cycle. And you'll see on the very last page that even for 2020, without appeal, it sits at $892,000, which is only $5.69 a foot. So it's been established. They had said, oops, we overpaid. They appealed based on that. The boards have agreed, and now the city agrees. And if we look at what the market value of that site is, not the sale price from 2014, it actually supports our value that we're proposing for our site, which is far larger, and again, I think inferior as far as location.
Just on the last two, I will caution you that comparison of assessed values are not considered,
Yeah, that's a fair comment, Mr. Chairman. I guess I bring it up for the fact that they overpaid, and this is my evidence of how they overpaid.
fair enough.
So again, when we look at those and really look at the transactions, I still feel that our value is supported at $6 a square foot and higher. And that completes our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
I was going to make that comment on compared assessments, but you made it for me, so thank you. I do have a few questions. My first question is that you brought up that they've been trying to develop this parcel of land since 1997. And I'm just a little confused. Is that the Hopewell development, or is that the people before Hopewell?
I think Hopewell bought it back in '97. And to be clear, I tried to caution that, or give a disclaimer to that comment, because the site, of course, wasn't remediated at that time. But they've gone through all these starts and stops, like they intended to remediate it when they first purchased it, and then they hit a wall. No, wait a minute, was it 97 or 2007? I apologize, it might have been 2007, because the first wall that they hit was the recession. And then they came out of that, and there was, again, lack of demand, and then Seasons took off. They were hoping for this to be kind of the new commercial hub. Seasons took off, and they're held back again. And now they're finally starting to go, but it's a very, very slow road for them.
Okay, because since they've put those roads in, I think in the last 2 years, like you said, they put up the residential, they have the good life going in. I believe they started something else recently as well. So I guess I would just disagree with your assessment on the speed of this. It seems like it's going up fairly quickly once the roads. Not to mention the rapid transit is about to open as well, which is a huge component of this whole development, is it not?
That's one of the reasons why they started the multi-res development. Yeah. But I would disagree with that. I think this is a slow development, and again, the focus has been on the multi-res and the commercial. There's no interest at all in the industrial at the back, and I think there's reasons why. I mean, when I go through the site characteristics, I can see why the demand's less.
Okay. So you've spoken a lot about visibility for this type of site, and you feel visibility is something that's very important for industrial properties, and accessibility. But you would agree that they do have 3 access roads to 3 main arteries in the city, do you not?
They have one right now, and it's a small, at the time, a gravel road that comes off Chevrolet.
Well, they also have one to Bishop Canyon.
Yeah, but again, if you've driven up that road, it's got a turnaround. There's no way that's going to be used for industrial purposes, trucking. That's for the commercial development.
So it depends. There's all different types of trucks. You agree? They're not
well,
just all large semi-trailers. Industrial properties use all different types of trucks.
Yeah.
So.
Fair enough. I think the main access points, though, will be off Chevrolet and eventually off Waverly. But this isn't the same as being on a thoroughfare like Waverly or in an industrial park like Kingster Park.
So although you say that there shouldn't be a premium or a premium put onto, I guess, properties in the Fort Garry area, basically the premium that we're seeing in the sales that I brought forward, you can't deny that these sales were an open market sales, transactions, or arm's length between a willing buyer and a willing seller in close proximity to the property, including the 2 Waverly properties.
Well, see, this is exactly why I wanted to start my presentation talking about accessibility and visibility, because the subject would never be purchased as an auto dealership in this location, not in my mind.
But the subject is also not being valued at $10 or $11 a square foot. It's being valued at $6.86.
Which is why we're here. There's a gray area, so I'm suggesting that this wouldn't be much higher than the average industrial sale price. And I guess the city's suggesting that because of these sales on Waverly, it's got to be a bit higher. So that's why we have a gray area.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, any questions, Ray?
No questions.
Any questions?
Yes, just out of curiosity, some of your examples you're stating the one off Narren and the other one of Industrial Park. Those are lower visibility than what you would have in the property in question.
I don't know if I'd agree with lower, but I certainly wouldn't. I agree that they're not higher. But this is why I'm establishing that when we look at typical industrial sites, we're looking at something less than 6.
The property in question, that had been an industrial site for many, many years, and they had all kinds of trucks going into that area at that time. And now building that road up again would not be a big deal for better accessibility to that property
They had many trucks going onto the site.
when it was a sugar beet factory.
Oh, but for the purposes of the sugar beet factory, I think they're coming off of, at the top at Chevrier where that access is. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the rest of this site, though.
Well, I mean, once you've got a road into that site, it's good for all concerned, right?
Right.
That's all I have.
Okay.
I was going to ask, do you know how much of an inventory of developable industrial land there is in Fort Garry?
In Fort Garry? That's a great question. No, I don't have it here. So no, I don't.
Okay, because that could speak to demand.
Actually, that's a great point, Mr. Chairman, but what also is happening in the marketplace for industrial land is the increased supply of all the RMs, including McDonald. And that's having, starting to have an effect at the reference date, certainly having an effect now on
Okay, and I guess the city's comparable number 2, you said became a MTS data center, so that's not a use that depends upon visibility, is it?
No, certainly, no, it wouldn't be more important for visibility, but I think it influences the value of the site. I think that's what drove them to have to pay a higher price.
Okay. I have no more questions, so does either party wish a summation on this one?
I have no submission.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. The next property, well, again, no address, so file number 19-2803, and again, it's 3 issues of 3 points of appeal.
Class and liability have been withdrawn.
To be withdrawn, okay. So I stand corrected, 1 point of appeal, assessed value, so you may proceed.
Okay. The roll number is 0309300270. The owner again is Hopewell Development. The assessed value is $5,628,000. It's a vacant industrial land zoned M2, and the land area is 848,137 square feet. Again, basically the same brief as the one before. This property is adjacent to the one that we just went over. So I've gone over what this property is going to become, the mixed-use development, was a sugar beet, has been remediated. So looking at page 2 and 3, you can get an idea of what the property looks at. Page 4 again is the 2016 view of it, so you can see that it has been scraped. Page 5 is the zoning, and page 6 is the cost valuation. On page 7 of my comparables, they're the exact same comparables that we've gone over last time. There's no change. They range in sale price from $6.89 up to $11.79 a square foot. Again, page 8 has the comparable pictures. 1 and 2 are on page 8, and 3 and 4 are on page 9. Page 10 is the class and liability, and page 11 is the Municipal Assessment Act. So again, just following along what we did with the last one, nothing for this property. It's very similar. It has a similar square footage and a similar rate that we've placed on it. So we feel that it should be confirmed at $5,628,000. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
No questions.
All right, any questions?
No, none right now.
Okay, I have none, so you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the rebuttal. It's the same comparisons, but
Yeah, that's fine.
maybe the board needs a copy for the record. So,
Do you need one for your file?
No.
You're okay?
it's a mirror case of the previous one. This is the property directly on the west side. It's almost the same size, just under 20 acres. We're looking at the same comparisons. The city has their 4. We have concern about some of those skewing the opinion of the location factor. We feel that there are many factors about the property, including, partly accessibility. We feel that it is not comparable to something on a main thoroughfare. But also, something that we have alluded to, but not focusing on too much, is the sheer size and economies of scale. So for these reasons, I think that when we look at all comparisons, there is no reason to believe that this would be commanding that much higher than the average industrial sale price in Winnipeg. And we again ask for a value of $6 a square foot even.
Questions?
No questions?
Doug?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Now we come to Lorimer Boulevard.
Okay, the roll number is 10006417400. The owner is a number company. The property type class is vacant industrial land. The zoning is M2 and the land area is 538,725 square feet. So turning to page 2, you can get an idea of where it's located. It's between Kenaston and Sterling Loyne and Wilkes. It's near the golf dome. For reference point, you can see it's a large rectangular property that runs along Lormore and Wilkes Avenue in Sterling Loyne. Page 3 just gets you a closer look at the property. Turning to page 4, you can see the zoning. It's M2, which is intended for light manufacturing, processing, service, storage, wholesale, and distribution. Again, nothing's been built on it yet, so currently it's vacant land. Page 5 is the cost summary, just showing that it is land only. And again, page 6, these are my exact same comparables from last time. I know we've gone over them, but the Wilkes property that we were speaking of before is directly across from the property. You can see that on page 2. It would be the property, I guess not directly, it's adjacent to the left of the property, right beside the golf dome. I know we've talked about that. We feel they overpaid for it, but we know this was an open market sale when it was sold. It was listed by Kohlers at the time, or Colliers. So my comparable sales are on page, the pictures are on page 7 and page 8, as we've gone over. And so I feel this value should be confirmed at $3,639,000. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, that's fine.
All right. Questions, Ray?
No questions.
Doug?
No, thank you.
I'm just wondering, this one, kind of long and narrow, would that affect the type of usage that could be done on this site? And if so, would that affect the value?
What type of usage? Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, if it's more square, then you can fit other things, the shape of the property.
Oh, I see. Well, I think
you're limited in what you can fit on there.
if you look across to the property beside it, that's actually an industrial property too, for the most part. It's a flex warehouse property. It's maybe not perfectly rectangular like this one, but you can see they fit a pretty interesting looking building on there. Mm-hmm. Again, when we're speaking of access, this property has fantastic access. One whole side of it's all along Lormore Boulevard, and the other side's on Wilkes, and the other one's in Sterling Loyne, which takes it right up to Kenaston. So, and it's a very large property. Although it's a rectangular, it still is fairly deep. So I feel like access and usability is good for this property.
Okay, thank you.
That's very interesting. I did have one question.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, the previous assessment for 2018-19 was $2.801 million, is that correct?
Actually, I don't have that with me, so
But assuming that the increase in the assessment is 30%, and just to be clear, nothing has physically changed with this property.
So my understanding is that was a decrease at the Board of Revision. So the value that we brought in before was probably higher than the decreased value. So no, there's been no physical changes, but I believe we did value it higher.
Thank you.
Okay, so you can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. And again, I have rebuttal, but I think it's the same comparisons.
It's the same.
Yeah, so I'll just leave a copy for the record.
Same result?
Same
Yeah,
result.
I guess it would have to be.
So, for the direct evidence, then, Mr. Chairman, we have on page 2 a photograph at the end of the property. It's a similar argument here that we had to the others, in that we don't believe that significant premium should be applied to these sites because something sold for a high amount on Waverley. We have to look at what is actually happening to the site. And the difference between the last ones that we talked about and this one is that this site has sat undeveloped for a considerable amount of time. So, to be frank, at first glance when we review these properties, I mentioned to the owner that based on the circumstances I see, good frontage, good location as far as what's happening around it, the assessment seems fair, even though we reduced it considerably last time. But then when we start talking about it, I start to realize, oh, well, there's reasons why a very prudent owner who developed the site beside on Lorimer has not been able to do anything with the site. There's actually caveats on this title that hinder development in that they have to pay a considerable amount to the City of Winnipeg to reimburse the city's costs of servicing that originally went in on Sterling Lion when Bridge Brand Foods, the GFS Foods, developed across the street. If I can ask you to turn to page 19, when the owner had told me that, the first thing I thought is, well, I have to see that. I have to be able to show the board that there's actually some sort of restriction on title. And in fact, we find that on page 19 and 20, there are 2 caveats by the City of Winnipeg. Descriptions, purchase and sale agreement, the second amendment to purchase and sale agreement. And when I researched these caveats, it corroborates what the owner was telling me, that they have to basically pay for costs that were already incurred. In their mind, it would be close to $1 million, and they also have to put in a laneway along Lorimer. These are things that they've never experienced before, and are the reasons why that this site is sat vacant, because otherwise I would think prudent investors would not allow a site like this to sit unused. The second thing, Mr. Chairman, is that it's actually been made worse since 2015, is that back to your point about the long, thin nature of the site, you'll see on the photo that the west side of the site runs along a railway. And since 2015, ever since the Lac Mégantic actually happened in Quebec, there's been recommendations made to each municipality across Canada that's now being abided by council, that there are setbacks from railways up to 30 meters. And of course the site is wider than 30 meters, but it further hinders potential development because it's eroding the potential development area. So these little factors, which come back to the original point is, well, why would such a site like this be sitting vacant for so long? So my point then in our analysis is, again, if we know that the average industrial value around Winnipeg is south of $5 a foot, when we understand reasons why this might not be, should not perform significantly more than those types of properties, why would we apply a premium? So I come back to the same position that I had on the others. When we look at typical sales around, and we look closer at the ones in Fort Garry and understand that they sold for high amounts because they're being, they're paying more because of the location that they're in, on major thoroughfares with over 30,000 vehicles of traffic per day, like Waverley, that we can't rely too much on those. And there's no reason to believe that this would sit that much higher, in this case at $6.74 a square foot the assessor has, than average industrial sale prices. So in the end, again, we're at an amount less than that, but because of the circumstances here, I feel that it should be a little less than $6 as well. So we've applied $5.50 a square foot on page 17, which is $240,000 an acre. And that, when we apply it to the 12.4 acres, equates to a value of $2.976 million, which is still an increase, despite the fact that the property still sits completely vacant and completely unchanged from last cycle. It's an increase over the 2.8 million that was applied by the, I believe, by the Board of Revision. But as evidence of that, we have on page 22 the 2019 tax bill, where you can see the lower assessment. That's our presentation, Mr. Chairman.
All right, questions?
So these caveats, so one was the laneway, and sorry, what was the second one that you were speaking of?
They, two municipal caveats on the land further hampers development potential. According to the owner, a laneway must be put in adjacent to Lorimer, which I've confirmed by owning the titles, as well as land drainage. Before development will be allowed, the owner estimates, and the reimbursement of costs for the servicing that the city paid for on Bridgebrand across the street. And so this, unfortunately, I don't have the numbers for. But on the title, this is the language in the instrument for that easement. It says, however, should the owner at its initiative subdivide or rezone the property, dedication fees will of course become payable. And what they're referring to is the servicing costs that the city put in.
Would you say this is typical for developments?
No, that was one of the questions I asked of the owner. I said, well, you know, you always have to service the site. He goes, not like, of course you have to service it, but he has to pay. This caveat says that you have to pay an additional amount before you can even develop it. And they said that's what's abnormal about it. That's why they haven't developed the site.
And why would that be?
Well, it's the caveat. The city's trying to reimburse the money that they put in when Sterling Line was developed. So Bridgeband, which is GFS Foods, were the first ones in. And I guess the city contributed to the servicing costs, but they said anybody else who develops along here has to contribute.
So you're saying that they purchased this property without knowing that?
No, they purchased it before that. They had the property.
Okay.
So they just haven't developed it. They developed the site beside on Lorimer because it doesn't front Sterling Line, but they haven't had a chance to develop this.
Okay. So of all your comparables, just on page 6, so you only have Waverly and Fultz that are within the actual close proximity to the subject property.
Yeah.
Do you feel that all properties within the city of Winnipeg, well, you reference it to your capital at your page 23 at per acre, $217. So you feel they should all be valued around that, the average? There's no premium really given for the Fort Garry area?
No, I discussed premium, but I used caution because, again, if we use those sales in Fort Garry that we've discussed that I think are far superior, even uncomparable, then we have a skewed result. And if we use the premium in the market rents, which are also reflecting lower age, I think we also have a skewed result. So I'm trying to be cautious in the premium that I apply over the average industrial value of under $5 a foot. And in this case, it's going to be $5.50.
And this question is just more of interest. You spoke about the railway being 30 meters away. Are you speaking of the railway that's running behind the Golf Dome, or the one that's running on the other side of Lormore behind the property?
Yeah, the one that runs, well, you can see it in the picture, actually. Here's the side of the gate for it. It runs up along the site and then kind of veers off. You can see it in the photograph here. So here's the crossing.
Do you mind just referencing my page 2 of my document? Because is it the one that's, I have my, they're running in red there, I guess it's the run that runs through Sterling Line and Wilkes. Is that the?
Yeah, it runs along the west side of the site here.
Oh, okay, I see it now. Okay, yeah, I didn't see it before, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Those are all my questions.
Okay, Ray, any questions?
No questions.
Doug?
Just one. In the caveats, so if they were to develop on that land, the cost to do that would be 1.4 million? Is that
1.4? Well, he was giving me an estimate. He said that he estimates it would be about $1 million before they could even start to develop the site.
so? This is basically to pay the city for any services had been put in down that roadway.
Down Sterling Line, precisely. It doesn't count the obvious servicing that they'd have to do on the subject site. That's off, but it's the servicing that they connect to that they have to.
So if they want to hook into a water line or a sewer line, right?
Exactly.
That rail line, is that a local spur line or is it a main line, do you know?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
He's got some main line there.
I think it's a main line. I mean, it has the crossing. I'm trying to think if I got caught at it at any time. But, I can't answer with certainty, but I think it is a main line.
It's a main line that runs along Wilkes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the CN main line there. But the one that comes off and then goes along to the west of this property.
That's a spur.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's a spur line, and if so, would the setbacks be less than if it were a
I think the setbacks is 15 years for spurs and 30 for a major.
Okay. And the other one is at the Burlington Northern line, all the way on the other side.
Oh, the one that runs along
Yeah.
Wilkes? Yeah, that's definitely.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving north, we go to McPhillips Street.
Yeah, the roll number is 14099996400, Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries Corporation. The assessed value is $3,280,000. It's vacant industrial land, zone C3, and the land area is 952,907 square feet. I actually have a verbal recommendation for this one, to change it to $2,951,000. That would be applying $2.50 a square foot to the land area, but keeping the cost summary for the asphalt the same. You can see the cost on page 5 of my brief.
How do you feel about that, Lily?
Accept.
Accepted? Okay. Short and sweet. Any questions? Ray or Doug? Okay. Bickerton Street, not the Bickersons, but Bickerton.
So the roll number is 0605283510. It's vacant industrial land, and the assessed value is $2,430,000, and the owner is Alcips Industrial Products Ltd. The zoning is M3, major heavy manufacturing, and the land area is 391,523 square feet. So turning to page 2, you can see a look at the property. There actually are some structures on this property. Although it's majority assessed by land value, there are some cost values or reconstruction and new values. So page 3 will give you a closer view of the property. Page 4 has the zoning, so this district's a little different than the M2. It's intended for heavy development, including heavy manufacturing, storage, major freight terminals, waste and salvage, resource extraction, processing, transportation, major utilities, and other related uses. So turning to page 5, we can see the cost approach for the buildings there. We have a reconstruction, if new, for all the buildings at $80,000. So the description of the buildings, it's a metal frame. It has some heated space. So basically, we've come, after the depreciation, we've come to a total of $80,000 for it. So turning to the larger portion of the valuation on page 6, and we'll be looking at comparable properties for this one. So comparable 1 is on Hutchins, comparable 2 is on Hyde, and comparable 3 is on Foster, and comparable 4 is on Mission. So they're all pretty close to well, 2 of them are very close, the Foster and the Mission one, and then Hyde and Hutchins are in the Inkster Industrial Park and sort of near the Inkster Industrial Park to the north. So we're looking at the zoning for these ones are M2, M1, M2, and M3 for the comparables. Looking down to the sales details, they sold in January 15 That was the comparable number 1 for $6.89. Comparable 2 sold in September of 2016, so $6.57. Comparable 3 sold in October 17 for $6, and comparable 4 sold in 2014 for $5.82. So the subject property, if you look over to the right-hand side, is at $6 a square foot. And again, looking at the land areas, so the subject property is 391,523 square feet. Comparable 1 is 319, comparable 2 is 229, comparable 3 is 119, comparable 4 is 59,000. So again, comparable, turning to page 7, we can look at comparable 1. We've seen this one before. It's the Elixir Industrial Park that we spoke about before. Comparable 2, it's on Hyde. It's just off Oak Point Highway. It's got somewhat poor access. You have to kind of turn into Hyde Street, the small street, to get into it. You have a building kind of in front of it. And then page 9 is on Foster. And page 4, this is the one on Mission. So when looking at the comparables, we feel the value of $2,430,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, I'll just reserve it for rebuttal.
Okay. Questions, Ray? Doug?
No, thank you.
Just a question on the buildings. Typically, at least in my experience, when the land value exceeds the value of the buildings on the property, you just default to land.
Yeah.
Now, why are you adding the value of the buildings there?
I think because they are somewhat integral to the operation of this property. They are fairly large buildings, maybe not in comparison to the actual size of the property, but they are being used. So I guess we feel it was needed to add the additional value of $80,000 for those reasons.
Okay. All right. So you can proceed, Mr. Sloan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 2 is a photograph of the property. It's not accessible from Cole, where the main ownership is, but rather coming up Small Street, Bickerton, and then down a small alley, or sort of gravel way, and it takes you onto the site from the south end. You can see that better on the aerial photo on page 3. So the only access here is from this rear part. This is Bickerton coming up and coming into McCutcheon's, and then you take the gravel way past other properties and into the site. So we've done a similar analysis. We agree that the buildings would contribute little value, but what we did a little different is we did an income approach on the buildings, and we ended up with a value quite a bit higher than the $80,000 the city's applying. So if I can direct you to page 6, we looked at a number of rental comparisons for smaller buildings in the late 60s, early 70s vintage. And the average about $5.26, and the subjects being older, we used $5. And then we used typical parameters on the valuation. Shortfall, non-recovered vacancy, and cap rate of 7.5, and we come up to a much higher value of $386,000. But of course, when you do an income approach, it's including a component of land that's similar to your comparisons. And typically for industrial properties, it's around 4 to 1. So what we're saying is that the value of these buildings, if we do it by this approach, includes a 4 to 1 land to building ratio, which is about 27,000 square feet of land. Not very much compared to the whole thing. But still, the value of the buildings, even without the land included, is considerably higher than the city. So by our approach, though, what we then do is we apply a value to only the residual land. So if the total site is 380,000 feet, 390,000, we have 27,400 included in our income approach for the buildings, and then the rest we look at based on the sales. So that's just kind of the background of, it's very close in logic, but a little different way of looking at it. So on page 8 we have a listing of, again, industrial properties ranging in size from 120,000 up to just under 5 million, much, much larger site. And all other things being equal, we agree with the concept of economies of scale. As you get larger, typically your value per square foot will be coming down. And we can see that by the two largest comparisons, which is why we put less weight on those. Just like we would put less weight on much smaller parcels, or field of need adjustment, we do the same for much larger. So going through each of the comparisons, I won't spend much time because a lot of these are similar to what we talked about before. They're samples of industrial properties which corroborate the averages that we see of around $5, just under $5 a square foot. Again, the properties we're discussing today have characteristics or circumstances which we think need to be considered in the value. With the subject property, those considerations are not the optimal access and the sheer size. So comparison 1 is also in St. Boniface, 600 Camille Cis. We've talked about this before. It sold for $418 a square foot. The second comparison is very close to the subject, actually. This is quite a good comparison as far as location. It's just off Nairn. Cole is south of Nairn, just when you pass over the bridge. So this is further down, and then you turn down Foster, but it's much smaller. So in our opinion, this is a great comparison, notwithstanding A, the accessibility, the fact that this has frontage all along Foster, and B, the sheer size. So if this sold for $6 a square foot close to the reference date, we think this is actually a good indication that we should be somewhere south of that amount. Third comparison we talked about was on Mission, again in St. Boniface Industrial. It sold for $4.03 a square foot, much smaller. The fourth is on Inksbrook, used for trailer storage. It's an older sale and sold for $3.16 a foot. We put less weight on that for that reason. Number 5 is again in St. Boniface. I think it's smaller and a very good sale, but sold in 2015 for $4.02 a square foot, now developed. The next is in just off St. James, off King Edward, and that's much smaller than the subject, and sold for $6.57 a square foot. 455 to Bates is the next comparison, sold close to the reference date for just under $5 a square foot, again smaller, and good access off 2 street fronts. The next comparison, 330 Mazenot, is now developed as the Parma processing facility, sold in 2016 for $3.80 a square foot. And the last two I won't put much weight on. They're far larger than the subject property. So the average of all of them, including those large properties, is $378. But we recognize that also the subject is poor access and the size is greater than most of the other comparisons. So in the end, we end up at $4 a square foot, which is $174,000 per acre. When we apply that to the 8.4 acres, we have a value for the residual land. Right? This is on top of the income approach that we had. It would be $1.464 million, and when we add in the building and land that we did on the income approach, we have a total value of $1.85 million. If I could ask you to turn to page 24. The presentation we have today is very similar to the presentation we brought forward to the board of revision for the 2018-19 cycle. Nothing's physically changed with the property, and the board concurred with us that the value should be reduced, not to the value that we asked for, but to $1,772,000, and we're still much higher than that for our proposed 2020 value, or sorry, April 18 value. So that would conclude our presentation, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll just make a few mentions about the city's comparisons and the above, if I may. Sure. Again, we've talked about this property in Inkster Park. It's a fairly good comparison, but I think it has to be recognized being an industrial park and having large frontage on 2 sides, it's superior to the subject property. So I think we should be definitely south of what the property here sold for. 65 Hyde is the second comparison. That also is a comparison in our evidence. And 25 Foster. Yeah, Foster's the one that, except for the size, I thought was a good comparison as far as location. Sorry, two factors, size and the fact that the access is better on this one. 975 Mission is the last city comparison. It's much smaller, it's only 1.37 acres. And it sits with good frontage, you can see in this photograph, along Mission, and it's now improved with a warehouse. So I don't think, I mean, when we look at location and access and things like that and size, I don't think there's anything that would sway our opinion that the subject property would be less than average industrial values, and that based on the evidence, $4 a square foot seems appropriate. And then adding the building value. And that is all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions?
Just on your comparables on page 8, if our property's on service, it probably sell for less than if it was service, correct?
Typically.
So are you aware that your 330 Masno Road is sold on service?
It's sold on service, but the city and the province paid for 80 or 85% of the servicing in that case.
Like after it's sold?
Well, it was part of the agreement. Parmalat had an agreement with them to pay for the servicing almost entirely when they purchased the property.
Okay. And interesting one about the Innsbruck property here. Although the land, the actual area is 134,535 square feet, the actual only usable space is about 91,725 square feet. And the reason for this, if you look at your picture on page 10, there's actually a slope that runs down to the water there.
Yeah.
So it's to the point where this has been on appeal, and we're now only assessing it for the 91,725 square feet. So that being said, when it was purchased, it'd probably be with the understanding that they can only use a certain portion of that property. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that about the site. That completely makes sense.
Which one was that?
On page 10 of his brief.
So based on that, I guess the revised on the usable area would be 467 a foot.
Approximately.
Yeah.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, Ray, any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. The land, when you look at on page 8, you come out to an average of 378 per square foot for the price, and that's the amount that you use on page 19 when you, under the conclusion, you said the average above this industrial sale price 378. But you also said that the last two, the Waverly and Doodle, shouldn't apply because but yet they're included as part of the average. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mentioned that, I put less weight on those, but to be fair, I'm including ones that are much lower, but I'm just doing the math now to see what would happen if we exclude those, and then of course we would make adjustments to the subject property for the factors I've considered.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the revised would be slightly higher than this, it would be 456. If we exclude the last two,
Yes.
and I still think that our position, that when we look at the comparability of these properties to the subject, $4 seems to make sense to me.
Doug, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Got 3 properties left. Does anybody need a short break? No. Okay. We'll get a glass of water and then have a break. Then continue on. Come to again a no address property, so file number 193176.
Okay, the roll number is 0600575500. The owner is the Manitoba Hydroelectrical Board. The assessed value is $1,716,000. Again, it's vacant industrial land, zoned agricultural, And the land area is 2,288,019 square feet. So turning to page 2, you can take a look at the property. It's highlighted in red. It kind of runs along the perimeter highway and Lagimodier Boulevard there on the other side of the perimeter. There's 2 sort of access points here. There's one on Plessis and one on Millhaw Road there. So although the one on Millhaw looks like it's quite a small access point to the property. So the majority of the property is rectangular in nature except for where the 2 access points jut out. There's a couple of residents that run beside the property. Again, this is owned agricultural land. So page 3 gives you a closer look at the property. And page 4 will show the zoning. So turning to page 6, we're going to look at some of the comparables. So for comparable 1, this is on Marion Street. It's definitely not zoned agriculture. It's zoned industrial manufacturing. The reason I picked it is because it's got a very high land area at over 5 million. And also because if you turn to page 7, you can take a look at the property. It has very poor access as well. You can see the property in red, and basically the only access is Marion Street through a small little strip as well. So in terms of access, it's quite similar in that sense. And also due to the size of the property. It's also got contaminated soil, so it would need to be remediated as well. And this sold in April of 2016 for $1.25 a square foot. Then our second comparable is just a little west of the property. It's on a 2-mile road. It's St. Vital on the perimeter south. It's a rural residential. There's no water, there's no sewer. It's got light traffic. It sold in December 2016 for 69 cents a square foot. So you can see that on page 7 as well. And then comparable number 3. This one is directly across from the subject property on the perimeter. So if you turn back to page 2, and you look across the perimeter, you can see the property. It's kind of outlined in two. I'll show you guys here. If you touch it up, this will be the property here and here. So that property there, it's sold for $2.50 a square foot. So it sold for $11 million in October of 2013. Now, this did sell because it is partially going to be developed. You can kind of see that in my picture too. There's going to be a small addition to Sage Creek here on part of the property. Whether that it will extend further to the property by Lagimodier, I'm not too sure. But at one time this was zoned agricultural. The zoning changed to residential. So that's what it's going to be developed for now. So for the subject property, we're at 75 cents a square foot, and we're at $1,716,000. So we've gone over the 3 comparables. So we feel the value for this property should be confirmed at $1,716,000. Thank you.
Okay. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Robinson, back to a question earlier today about the value of land being influenced by its utility or development potential. The subject property is not located in an area that's a designated development planned area, is that correct?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not too sure about that question. What would that be, a designated development area? What would it be?
Would you agree that a property in an area that's designated for development in the near future would likely command a value higher than one that's not in such an area?
I don't want to speak to that because I'm not too sure exactly what you mean by like a designated developed area, I guess. Like I feel like all land on some level can be developed.
Well, I mean, it has to be approved, right? And so the point of the development or the area plans is that council or province then has established a certain area to be kind of green-lit to be developed in the near future. And oftentimes you'll see, for like a great example, sorry, this isn't a question now.
That's okay. No, I asked the question to you.
Yeah. But if that were the case, an area that was designated for development, would you believe that that would probably command a higher value than an area that was not designated for development?
I guess, yes, like, I don't know what the process is to get something designated. I don't know if there is a large value that needs to be put down for that. So I would say yes, designated to development, sure, it could derive a higher value, but I don't know how complicated that is to get something designated, is what I'm saying.
I think that is all the questions that I'm thinking.
Okay, Ray, any questions?
No questions.
Doug?
Yes, on the property in question, it's zoned agricultural right now.
Surely, yeah.
So is, a tough one to ask, is that going to be turned into residential at some point? And if so, will the province allow that?
Well, this is city property, not province property.
I understand that,
So
but
I'm not,
even saying that, I mean, from what I know, ag land is hard to get now. So why would they be developing ag land?
well, just further to your point, my comparable that was above it was agricultural land, and it did change to residential zoning to build up Sage Creek more at one point. So it's not like this doesn't happen. Similarly to my comparable, I believe it is 2. Again, that was agricultural land at one point, now rezoned into rural residential. And you can even see that there are some residents beside the property there as well. So I'm not saying that, again, might go back to this question about like development. I don't know if they are going to develop this land or not, but you see it happening where agricultural land around the city is being basically bought up and turned into residential.
Thank you.
Okay, in terms of the residences, if you look at page 3, they appear to be more farm sites to me than, well, maybe not.
I just think they have a lot of land. I don't think they farm that much.
Yeah, okay. But wouldn't the perimeter highway kind of serve as a border for development, and it'd be certainly a long time coming before any development occurs south of the perimeter?
Oh, I don't think so. I think even if you look at my page 2, you can even see down on the other side of the perimeter, there's all these houses there as well. Like they bottom left-hand corner, like the perimeter is no longer the perimeter of the city.
Outer beltway.
Yeah.
Certainly in that area, I guess. Yeah. Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, again, what we have here is a gray area on value, and the city has some comparisons, we have some comparisons, and the caution that we have is that when we look at certain sales without understanding where they're at in development timeline or what the potential is of developing the site, factor points about accessibility, visibility, all these different things, we can get a skewed value. So this property, we're talking more about the timeline for development. The principle is that if I'm going to buy a parcel of land, I will pay more for a parcel of land that I think is a greater likelihood of being developed quicker. So I don't want to be sitting on a parcel of land for that long. Back to Mr. Lobestein's point, I mean, anything's possible. Any lands can be developed, but the likelihood of them being developed in a designated plan area is much higher. That's why people pay more for them. That's the whole idea of the investment in these lands. So one of the fundamental things is when we look at the comparisons, where are they located? Are they located in areas that are designated for development, which may influence the value higher? A great example is the property mentioned in Sage Creek. Well, that's clearly going to be developed residential. It's part of the plan by the city, and that's why it was purchased. And what I'm going to show you when we go through comparisons of these larger parcels of land is you get quite a delta in values between the parcels that have a short development time horizon, like Sage Creek, and those that have a long time horizon, like those that are not in a designated area plan. So, on page 3 is an overhead map of where the subject's located. And you're correct, it's just south of the perimeter. Now, another thing about the property that's interesting is look at the configuration of it. It's odd. It has a small stretch that you access the largest portion of, which is really rear edge, and then another section that comes off of a gravel road along the side. Even if it was in a development area, would I feel that this is the prime sort of, is this really good land to develop? Is it like that parcel on 2 Mile Road where it's a great straight rectangle lot that you can start developing streets and lots on? I mean, this seems a little, it's not impossible, I'm not saying that, but it's just not as advantageous. That's on the physical side. Page 4, we get closer into how this looks, and yes, the area is mostly agricultural. There are some large residential lots along that one road. Now, page 5 is a section of an overall map of Winnipeg from the city planning group that talks about the areas that are designated for development. Sage Creek, you can see, is number 5. That's just north of the subject, and that's where I believe the city's comparison on Kitolko is located. Number 4 is called the St. Vital Secondary Development Area. So it's kind of targeted as a potential development down the road. And that is where you'll find comparison number 2 from the city, which is 2 Mile Road. It's stuck right in the middle here, off of St. Anne's. And our subject is where the red dot is, kind of in between. So again, to Mr. Levacy's point, nothing's impossible. I mean, down the road somebody could put forward, but the likelihood of development and the timeline for development is much higher in areas that are designated, and that's going to influence the value. And that's why I suggest that we be cautious when we look at 2 Mile Road or Kitolko as comparisons. The property is zoned agricultural right now, a little different than the city's comparisons, which are zoned industrial. Number 1 is right in the center of St. Boniface. It's the old Canada Packer site. I understand some of the detriments that Mr. Levacy described, but I wouldn't really say it's a comparable property. And then the other 2 are both in designated development areas, and they're zoned for residential development. So on page 10, we have a whole list of what I call odd land comparisons. These can be for right-of-ways, hydro corridors, which I don't think we'll be discussing today, and also large sites. So the ones I'd like to focus on, actually, Mr. Chairman, are indices 5, 13, 15, 17, and 18. I'll draw your attention to each one in a moment. But first off, because the time horizons of these sales are not as close to the reference date, we've time adjusted them. And we don't do this all the time because it's very subjective. It's a difficult thing to do. But when we have sales that are more than 2 years, if we go back before mid-2015, I think you should be cautious about not having some adjustment to them. So that the values, the sale prices per foot that I'm going to quote are time adjusted. We've used an adjustment of 0.625 or 0.63 per month, percent per month, which equates to 7.5% per annum, 15% per assessment cycle, which is not far off from what the commercial development increases had been seeing in these years. Slowed down now. Residential not that high. So again, if we're talking about something for residential development, we might be overshooting our time adjustment. But in any event, if I could ask you then to turn to the very first one, is Index 5. It's on page 15. And then we'll talk a bit about this comparison. It's located in the north part of town on Pipeline Road, south of Templeton. It's a long rectangular site with frontage off of Pipeline. The sale price was $2.48 a square foot in 2015, and I've adjusted that to about $3 a square foot. But here is an example of what I was talking about. This is a site that is in an area designated as a new community. It has a complete communities direction strategy, therefore legally developable as residential. It's in what's called Precinct E. So it's in the city, it's designated for development. So somebody comes along when they know that this is going to be happening and they purchase this land because it's a good investment, it's land banking. And in no time at all, whether they develop theirs, other developments are going to happen, and that just keeps rising the value. So it's a different sort of investment than buying something agricultural in an area that's not likely going to be developed for some time. So what you'll be finding is you do see prices that are in the $2.50 to $3 a square foot for large agricultural or rural residential zoned lands. This is zoned R1E, so it's actually zoned for residential. But these are the sort of values you find when people know that they're going to be developed in some time horizon. The next comparison, I think I mentioned, is I head to number 13. So if I could ask you to turn to page 23. We'll see again an example of these premium sites that are in the city or on the edge of the city, zoned RR5, and basically high development potential. And this property sold for $1.43 a square foot in 2015. We've adjusted that, time adjusted it to $1.74. Again, I'm going through these first so you can see the correlation between development potential and value. These are not what I consider comparisons to the subject. I'm going to get to those last. The next comparison, or the next sale that I'd like to draw your attention to is number 17. So that's found on page 25. And actually, this is the one that the city had. This is Catulco. So this is in the Sage Creek region, just on the opposite side of La Jamodier. And you can see it's just south of the development that's already happened. And they purchased this back in 2013 for $250 as the 9th phase of a residential development. Again, we're seeing this pattern that when properties are in an area that's going to be developed, they're going to command a higher value. So what I'd like to do now is point out some development parcels, or speculative development parcels, those that are not in these kind of areas that are designated for development. And so I'm going to come back to Index 10. This is the very first one I'd like to draw your attention to. I really probably should put these in order of development potential, though. It would have been easier. So if you turn to page 20, this will be the first one that I think is a better comparison to the subject, and then we make adjustments for site-specific characteristics. You can see this property is also south of the perimeter. It's just off Waverly. It's a long rectangular site, 1,234,000 square feet in size. And it's located not in, but across from Precinct X, which is designated for future development. So here we have an otherwise comparable property, but not in one of those zones. And this sold in 2017 for 69 cents a square foot. Now we're seeing what I was describing. If you have development potential in the short-term horizon, you're going to pay $2.50, $3 a foot. If you don't, you're going to be down in something around this value. But again, I think this is superior to the subject property. I'd like to draw your attention to a second one like this. On the next page, 21, a property on St. Boniface Road, just south of Dougal. From what I can tell, is not in a development area, and was purchased in February 2014 for 11 cents a square foot. It's 1,700,000 square feet in size. There is a time adjustment to that. I think it brings it to 14 cents a square foot. 15 cents a square foot. Again, this is an example of a large parcel that's probably not going to be developed for some time. We see a similar circumstance on page 22. A large property just near the second one. This is 2,180,000 square feet in size and sold in 2014 for 9 cents a square foot. Time adjusted to 12 cents a square foot for April 18. And lastly, on page 24, the property, it's in a similar area, not in a development area, but it's very large, 3.487 million square feet, and sold in February 2014 for 9 cents a square foot, time adjusted to 12 cents a square foot. So what we have for what I consider speculative development, large development parcels, mostly zoned agricultural, similar in those respects, but again, not in a short-term development horizon. We have values of between 12 cents a square foot and 74 cents a square foot. So I'm hoping that what we've described is the likelihood that the subject property would be in the lower amount when we look at both its physical layout its location and the fact that it's not in a development area. So we think that it would not command anything over even 50 cents a square foot for this type of site based on the comparisons we saw. And we're applying 40 cents a square foot, which is, we're applying 46 cents a square foot, which is 20,000 an acre. This is now on page 29. And if we apply that amount, the value would be reduced to $1,050,000. On page 31, you'll see the board's decision from the last cycle based on very similar evidence and the same discussion about development areas and non-development areas. And the decision in that case was based on a value of $915,000. So again, we're asking for $1,050,000, which is 46 cents a square foot or 20,000 an acre for the subject property.
I thought this one was familiar.
Oh yeah, you were on that, that's right. And I won't, Mr. Chairman, talk about the assessments of the properties around it, which would corroborate my position. I'll leave that aside. So that concludes our presentation. I think the rebuttal is kind of covered in our direct, so I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
Just a few. So you went over your index 11 on page 21, index 12 on page 22, and index 14 on page 24. These are all pretty much the same parcel. Do they sell as one unit?
Not that I know of. I think there are different transactions, but they are very close in proximity, and date of sale is very similar too. Yeah.
So these weren't a multi-role sale? They were.
I'm not aware.
Okay. So in terms of, so you talked about like a basically designated plan area for future development a lot. I guess my question is, like, what does it take to get it to be a designated plan area? Is it simply just changing the zoning?
No. Well, step one is that the province, I believe, has to make it an area, make the area a local plan, have a local plan around the development potential for that area. And then once that's done, then the zoning changes can happen, but that's still dependent on council's opinion. So it has to be brought before council, and there's a process around that too. So again, nothing's impossible, but the likelihood, and I guess what we're trying to do today is put ourselves in the mindset of the market. And what I'm establishing, I think, through the evidence is the hypothesis, supported by evidence, that if you buy a property in an area that's designated for development, you're going to pay more, because the timeline for it to be developed, or the surrounding properties to be developed, is much, much shorter. It's already designated. You know that people are going to be starting to put investment in that area. Even if you don't develop, everything else around you being developed is going to increase your value.
Right. So when you look at your page 5, our subject property is squeezed between two designated areas. Would that not increase their value?
Well, not from the evidence I'm showing. I'm showing that when you're in a pocket even adjacent to an area that's not yet designated, you don't see the premium in price, because your timeline is much further off. Down the road, this development plan could extend into that area, possibly. Then we would have a different discussion around value.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, Ray, any questions?
Yes, I do. You say that index 10 is inferior to the subject property. Why do you think it's inferior?
I think that its proximity to...
Or the other, the other way around, I should say, yeah.
Why is the subject
property? Yeah, subject property is inferior.
Yeah, well, number one is that the size is about half of the subject property. And the second is the configuration of the site being long rectangular with the frontage on Waverley. I think is more advantageous than to the kind of the predominant amount of the site being stuck back from the access points. But most importantly, I think that even if you're in a non-development area, being right in that Waverley West in proximity to that, I think would probably put you a little further ahead in the development timeline than where the subject is. So for those three reasons, I think we should do less than this property.
That's all my questions.
Okay, Doug, you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, I don't have a question so much as a comment on your page 27. Chief Pegless Trail extension is not going to run on the north side of that property.
Oh, I'm sorry, missing the type. Jefferson and King Edward.
It was originally supposed to come along there, but then there was resistance because it would take away portions of Little Mountain Park going across the highway 7 there.
But there was a talk of it originally.
There was.
Yeah.
It was part of the original plan.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, thank you. That whole area is being developed now, around that area, not that site specifically.
Yeah.
2129 Dewberry.
The roll number is 0901026260. It's the owner is a numbered company. The assessed value is $1,378,000. Vacant industrial land, zoned N3, and the land area is 229,610 square feet. So turning to page 2, I supplied a map this time. So this is on Dougal Road, right near Plessis, as you can see on the map. It's got the train yard behind it there. And I guess the new overpass would be at Plessis and Dougal there now as well. Page 2, you get an idea of what the property looks like. It's just vacant land. They do seem to store trailers on there. Page 3 gives you another view of the property. You can see the access is straight onto Dougal, or sorry, onto Plessis, or sorry, not Dougal, my mistake. And then page 4 has the zoning. Page 5 has the cost valuation or the land. So page 6 again gets into my comparables. So we have 5 comparables for this one. Again, we've seen the Hutching one. So comparable 2 is 65 Hyde. So this is a pretty interesting comparable in the sense of that it is again used. It looks like store trucks and trailers and stuff like that. And it's got poorer access than the subject property. It's at $6.57 a square foot, where the subject is at $6. And it has a very similar square footage at 229,744 square feet compared to the subject, which is 229,610 square feet. Then we have comparable 3 on Spears. Again, this looks like it was just used for some storage or some junk as well. It's at $9.11 for the sale. Number 4 is $5.14 a square foot. This is on page 8 as well, and this is at on 663 Marion Street. So this is fairly close to the subject property. And comparable 5 we've seen a few times today. Seems to be a popular one. It's the one with Foster. Again, this one's at $6 a square foot, and it's got 119,996 square feet. So all these properties are fairly similar to the subject property. I would say only comparable 4 probably really has the access the subject property has. So we feel looking at these comparables that the value of $1,378,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Levinstein, the subject property is located on Dougal Road, and it would be even further east than the St. Boniface Industrial Park. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so would you agree that properties in the St. Boniface Industrial Park might be a better indicator, when we talk about location, that might be a better indicator of value than those in certain other parts of the city?
Not necessarily. St. Boniface Industrial Park, I guess, doesn't quite have the access that Dougal has. It's access we know seems to be important for industrial properties. It's not a poor indicator. It would be part of the market for sure.
Your comparison number 3, Spears Road, does that include any buildings on the site at the time of sale?
There were buildings on it at the time of sale, but they were basically demolished. They weren't going to be used as just land value. They sold it for, is my understanding.
That's all the questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions.
No questions.
Okay. So you can proceed then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a photograph of the property. It's just off Dugald, gravel property used for trailer storage. And it's located on Dugald, past the St. Boniface Industrial Park, further east on the north side, and it's zoned M3. So we look at a similar set of comparisons that we talked about earlier today. So I won't go through each of them again, but I would like to point out that in my mind anyway, similar sized parcels in the St. Boniface Industrial are great comparisons. It's an industrial park, so I believe there is good access off all the streets there. And these are similar sized lots. So the comparisons County Sis, there's 2 of those, number 1 and 5. And then 7 and 8, the Bates and Mazenot. These are all very close to the subject property in the industrial park. And you can see that their sale prices range from $3.80 a square foot, but that is a larger site, to between $4.02 and $4.92 a square foot for the remaining 3. The average, I would like to correct, because again, I don't think we should put much weight on the last 2 for the size, and it was a good point asked by the board earlier, and my response was that the revised average then would be $4.67 a foot. So if you don't mind just crossing that out, and the note being that we're excluding the last 2 simply because of the size. So I think we have a pretty tight range, especially when we start looking at size, and that we should be in around the $4 to $5 range. The only comments I make about the city's comparisons are that I think our location is more indicative for the St. Boniface Industrial Park than many of these. And as Mr. Lobenstein had mentioned, that comparison of 3 of the cities, 29 skiers, and I have that in the rebuttal, actually did have about 10,000 square feet of buildings. Granted, the contributory value was probably minimal, but they were in place. So when we look at all sales again and we take all factors into account, I think that we should be in the range of $4 to $5 a square foot, which again is not far off the average industrial sale price that we talked about earlier. And so we've used $4.50 a square foot, which is $196,000 an acre. Which with the 5.3 acres would bring our value to $1,039,000. That's it. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Just in terms of St. Boniface Industrial Park, you would agree it's a fairly large industrial park?
Yeah, that's good sense.
So these comparables are pretty much about as far away from Dugald Industrial Park as you can get.
Well, yeah, as the park develops, I guess it keeps extending south and back west, so they're on those peripheries.
So their access to Dugald is not great in comparison to many other properties.
To Dugald, that's correct.
Okay. Those are all my questions.
Okay, Ray, any questions?
No questions.
Doug?
No, thank you.
All right, we come to our last unidentified property, so file number 193171.
The roll number is 0400-703-7300. The assessed value is $1,229,000. I do have a verbal recommendation to reduce the value to $860,000 rounded.
Based on
It's based on $1.75 a square foot.
how do you feel about that?
We accept.
That's 860.
860.
All right. Any questions from the panel on that one? Okay, so then that concludes today's hearing. So thank you very much for your able presentations.
Thank you very much.